Hello, Bible readers. It is Thursday, December 17th. We're reading from 2 Samuel chapter 7, 1 Chronicles 17 and 18, and Acts 24. Lots to read. And yet all the Old Testament stuff it's connected again. When we have these 2 Samuel and 1 Chronicles readings, it's because the chronicler is pulling stories from, in this case, 2 Samuel, to make further comments on, you could say. So in 2 Samuel, David has just heard a prophecy of dynasty for himself and those who will come after him. His response is prayer. But we see this is a different prayer. It's a different kind of prayer than what David has offered thus far. It's very formal, very calculating. 10 times he calls himself your servant. 7 times he refers to God as the Lord God. Very formal. But David isn't only admitting his place as servant in the Lord God's purview. David does, forcefully reminds God of God's promises. His tone, the way he speaks to God, I thought I'd read a bit from this commentary. Although David's prayer acknowledges divine sovereignty, it also boldly makes claims on that sovereign God. Our tendency in prayer as Christians is to seek both language and tone that we imagine are acceptable before God. We want to say it right? By contrast, Hebrew prayer brings before God the entire gamut of human experience and the moods appropriate to them. The laments of the Psalter are often cited in this regard. Anger, resentment, desire for vengeance, frustration with God's seeming inattention, a whole range of human feeling and experience seldom expressed in our prayer, finds expression in Hebrew prayer. It turns out God does not require a sanitized version of our most passionate struggles. I think Christians are guilty of that oftentimes, trying to, soften it as though God can't handle our emotions. And so we see here an example from David where he just talks to God as he feels. Our First Chronicles chapters, this is basically just the chronicler's take on 2 Samuel, as I said. Notice that David is still seeking the Lord with all his heart. That's not changing. David continues to be a model for the people of the chronicler's times. Acts, this is a very important piece of this book, and really not just this book, but the whole Luke Acts story. Luke spends a lot of time on Paul's trial. Why? To get at Paul's true identity and integrity, not for the characters who are in Acts as though they don't know who Paul is already. It's for the sake of the readers. So Luke spends so much time on all this because he wants readers to really understand who Paul is. The conversion of Paul and Paul's mission to the Gentiles requires slow digestion. Paul was obviously a stumbling block, and understanding Paul was a stumbling block for the church. And I'll be honest, just 25 years ago, I remember there was a book about how, is the church an invention of Paul rather than something God really wanted? That's something that Luke tried to address almost right away. The reader needs to fully understand how Paul fits into Luke's story and how Paul fits into the story of the church. And so, how does Paul continue Jesus' work? That's what Luke wants to get at. Why was he opposed? Who opposed Paul and why? Luke wants to shape the narrative around Paul, around who Paul is, why Paul does what he does, who was against him, why they were against him, instead of allowing Paul's story to be at the mercy of many who want to make lies about Paul. And so Luke tries to say Paul is genuinely a member of Israel. Paul believes in the resurrection of the dead. He's very generous to Jerusalem when he gets there. What separates Paul? Well, his belief that the Pharisees' hope in resurrection is fulfilled in Jesus. And of course, we Christians who read this story after can't blame him for that, right? So as for the story itself, Paul goes up against a smooth-spoken advocate and yet appears to win in court easily, but then he remains in prison. Felix turns out to not be so great, right? So this is an This is going to be a bumpier ride than maybe we had hoped for. I am one with my God. My God is with us, all of us at all times and in all places.